The Italian Mafia has produced some of the most violent criminals in history, but 8 men stand above the rest for acts so disturbing they shocked even their fellow mobsters. Every murder, every torture, every calculated act of cruelty pushed the boundaries of what organized crime thought acceptable. That's why today, I'm breaking down the 8 most disturbing mafia bosses to ever live, ranked from least to most horrifying, starting with a man doctors called a psychopath with the mental age of a child. The cigar. Carmine Galante was either a stone-cold enforcer or a walking time bomb, and honestly, he was probably both. And I can prove it. When prison psychiatrists examined Galante in 1931, they diagnosed him with a psychopathic personality and noted his emotional responses were basically non-existent. His mental age tested at 14 and a half. Their prognosis was one word: poor. But here's where it gets dark. That psychiatric report didn't slow him down one bit. By age 20, Galante had already shot an NYPD officer and accidentally hit a 6-year-old girl during a Brooklyn hijacking. Law enforcement suspected him in somewhere between 80 and 100 murders over his career. The most significant was probably the 1943 assassination of Carlo Tresca, an anti-fascist newspaper publisher. Galante allegedly gunned him down on a Manhattan street on orders from Vito Genovese as a favor to Mussolini. He was arrested, never charged. What made Galante disturbing wasn't creative torture or elaborate schemes. It was his complete indifference to human life combined with arrogance that made other mobsters uncomfortable. And after getting out of prison in 1974 following a 20-year narcotics sentence, one of his first acts was bombing the private mausoleum of deceased rival Frank Costello. He blew the doors off and disturbed the remains. Other mobsters thought this crossed a line. Galante didn't care. He seized control of the Bonanno family without commission approval, murdered at least 8 Gambino members to absorb their drug operations, and declared himself boss of bosses. He told a journalist nobody would ever kill him because they wouldn't dare. On July 12, 1979, 3 masked gunmen stormed Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant in Brooklyn while Galante ate lunch. His own Sicilian bodyguard stepped aside. Shotgun blasts and bullets tore through him, leaving more than 80 exit wounds. He died with his trademark cigar still clenched in his teeth. Yeah, the crime scene photo became iconic. Galante dead among overturned chairs and plates of food, eyes open, cigar in mouth. As paramedics carried his body out, it passed beneath a restaurant sign reading, "We give special attention to outgoing orders." But if you think a man with zero empathy is disturbing, wait until you hear about the mob boss who ran an actual murder corporation. The executioner. Albert Anastasia is either the most prolific contract killer in American history or just the guy who ran the company that was. And honestly, the distinction doesn't matter much. Here's the thing. Anastasia didn't just kill people. He operated Murder Inc., the National Crime Syndicate's enforcement arm that functioned like a business. Between 1931 and 1941, this organization carried out somewhere between 400 and 1,000 contract killings. Hitmen received regular salaries plus fees of $1,000 to $5,000 per job. They worked out of a candy store in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Methods included strangulation, ice pick stabbings, garroting, and immolation. George Rudnick was garroted with a sash cord and stabbed repeatedly with an ice pick, just because they suspected he might inform. Labor activist Peter Panto was strangled and buried in a lime pit on a New Jersey chicken farm. His body wasn't found for 18 months. But here's where it gets weird. Anastasia himself had been sentenced to death in 1921 for murdering longshoreman George Torino. The conviction was overturned when key witnesses vanished. This became his signature move. He faced murder charges in 1928, 1932, and 1933. Every single case collapsed because witnesses disappeared, recanted, or died. What made Anastasia truly disturbing was his willingness to murder completely innocent people over nothing. On March 8, 1952, a 24-year-old clothing salesman named Arnold Schuster was walking home when a gunman shot him twice in the groin and once in each eye. Schuster's crime: he had helped police capture bank robber Willie Sutton. Anastasia had zero connection to Sutton. He simply saw Schuster on television and screamed at his men, "I can't stand squealers! Hit that guy!" The killing of a random civilian for doing his civic duty enraged even other mob bosses. Nobody talks about this enough, but this murder violated every unwritten rule. Civilians weren't targets. Anastasia didn't care. On October 25, 1957, Anastasia sat down in chair number 4 at Arthur Grasso's barbershop in the Park Sheraton Hotel. His bodyguard had conveniently disappeared. 2 masked gunmen entered, shoved the barber aside, and opened fire. In his final moments, the mortally wounded Anastasia lurched from the chair air and lunged at his killers, but he was attacking their reflections in the wall mirror. He collapsed dead on the floor, still wrapped in white towels. But if you think killing a civilian over a TV interview is disturbing, wait until you hear about the boss who murdered someone over who got to sit in a restaurant booth. Little Nicky. Nicodemo Scarfo stood 5 feet 5 inches tall and killed people over insults most men would ignore, and that should tell you everything. Before you roll your eyes at another short guy with a complex, hear me out. Scarfo wasn't just violent. He was a boss who ordered 25 to 30 murders during his reign over the Philadelphia crime family. From 1981 to 1990, his own nephew and underboss, Philip Leonetti, later described him as a sick, demented, murderous psychopath who enjoyed killing people. It excited him. That assessment came from family. His first murder set the pattern. In 1963, Scarfo fatally stabbed longshoreman William Dugan in a South Philadelphia diner. The reason? They argued over who would sit in a booth. He killed a man over a restaurant seat, and he never stopped finding reasons just as petty. When cement contractor Vincent Falcone made disparaging remarks about Scarfo, he was lured to a Margate, New Jersey apartment on December 16, 1979. Leonetti shot Falcone twice. An associate tied the body in a blanket, and Scarfo watched with visible delight, declaring, "I love this. I love it." Then they cleaned the apartment and had dinner at Scarfo's place like nothing happened. But here's where it gets dark. The most psychologically cruel act of Scarfo's reign was ordering the murder of Salvatore Testa on September 14, 1984. Testa was the son of Scarfo's murdered friend and predecessor, a loyal soldier who had carried out at least 15 killings for Scarfo. But Scarfo grew paranoid about Testa's popularity within the family, so he commanded Testa's own best friend, Joseph Pungatore, to lure him into a trap, threatening to kill Pungatore's father and 2 brothers if he refused. At a candy store on East Passyunk Avenue, Salvatore Grande shot the 28-year-old Testa in the back of the head as he turned to greet his friend. The Riccobene War produced its own horrors. Even when Robert Riccobene tried to flee hitmen outside his mother's house on December 6, 1983, Frankie Iannarella fired a shotgun blast into the back of his head. When Robert's elderly mother grabbed Iannarella and screamed at him to stop, he struck her in the face with the shotgun butt. Scarfo also had associate Rocco Marinucci murdered with a homemade bomb taped in his mouth. The violence destroyed even his own family. His youngest son Mark attempted suicide during Scarfo's 1988 trial and remained in a coma for over 25 years before dying. Scarfo received a 55-year federal sentence and died in prison in 2017, having been the first American Cosa Nostra boss convicted of first-degree murder. But if you think killing your best friend's son is disturbing, wait until you hear about the hitman who studied anatomy textbooks to improve his dismemberment technique. Karate Tommy. Thomas Patera brought a level of precision to murder that no other mob killer ever matched, and the reason why is genuinely horrifying. Let me explain. Patera was relentlessly bullied as a child for his abnormally high-pitched voice. Witnesses described it as more falsetto than Michael Jackson's. So he spent 27 months training in Japan under a ninjutsu master and returned to Brooklyn transformed into a supremely dangerous fighter. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was what he studied at home: anatomy and dissection textbooks. He taught himself how to efficiently dismember human bodies. When DEA agents raided his Gravesend apartment on June 4, 1990, they found over 60 weapons alongside copies of The Hitman's Handbook and Kill or Be Killed, manuals covering assassination techniques and cadaver dismemberment. Law enforcement suspected him of involvement in as many as 60 murders. His standard method was cutting bodies into 6 pieces in a bathtub using a specialized toolkit he carried with him. He selected the William T. Davis Wildlife Refuge in Staten Island as his primary burial ground because the damp soil accelerated decomposition. He buried heads separately from torsos to prevent identification via dental records. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. Cooperating witness Frank Gangi testified that he witnessed Patera sit naked in a bathtub with the corpse of an informant he was dismembering. Patera reportedly kept a victim's ear, had it laminated, and carried it with him, producing it during interrogations by throwing it on the table and saying, "Talk to him." He killed through varied methods, shooting drug supplier Talal Siksik 4 times in the back before dismembering him, repeatedly stabbing dealer Marek Kucharski before having his throat cut, executing Phyllis Birdie by shooting her in her sleep and cutting her body apart. Prosecutor David Shapiro described how Patera tortured one victim by slowly, deliberately shooting him 7 times in various parts of the body. The clinical nature of it all was what made investigators sick. This wasn't rage. This wasn't even business. Patera approached murder like a craft he was perfecting. He studied. He practiced. he improved his technique. On June 25, 1992, Patera was convicted of 6 murders. Judge Rina Raghi sentenced him to life, stating, "Mr. Patera, nobody deserves to die as these people died." Patera smiled and gave a thumbs up to reporters. He remains incarcerated at USP McCreary, Kentucky, where he'll spend the rest of his life. But if you think a hitman who studies anatomy is disturbing, wait until you hear about the Sicilian boss that the most famous informant in Mafia history said wasn't even human. Don Lucino. Leoluca Bagarella occupies a category that even legendary Mafia informants struggle to describe. And the reason tells you everything you need to know about what comes next. Tommaso Buscetta, the most famous pentito in Cosa Nostra history, spent 3 months with Bagarella in a prison infirmary. When asked about him, Buscetta said, "I prefer not to speak about him. I think he doesn't belong to the human species." Buscetta estimated Bagarella had been involved in possibly 300 murders. Italian police described him as the author of hundreds of murders from the 70s to the 90s. And that's not hyperbole. Bagarella killed with his own hands, frequently and without hesitation. On July 21, 1979, he walked into the Lux Bar in Palermo and shot Deputy Police Superintendent Boris Giuliano 3 times in the neck as Giuliano drank his morning cappuccino. Then he stood over the body and fired 4 more bullets into the dying man's back. On January 26, 1979, he personally shot investigative journalist Mario Francesi 5 times outside his home. He participated in the 1981 assassination of Palermo boss Stefano Bontade that ignited the Second Mafia War, a conflict that consumed over 1,000 lives and saw victims tortured, strangled, burned, dissolved in acid, and drowned in the sea. But here's where it gets genuinely horrifying. After his brother-in-law Salvatore Riina's arrest in January 1993, Bagarella became the operational leader of Cosa Nostra's terrorist campaign against the Italian state. He orchestrated the Via dei Giorgofili bombing near Florence's Uffizi Gallery on May 27, 1993. The blast killed 5 people, including the entire Nencioni family, parents Fabrizio and Angela, their 9-year-old daughter Nadia, and 50-day-old baby Caterina. He targeted cultural heritage sites. He played a central role in the kidnapping of 11-year-old Giuseppe Di Matteo. Ahu was held for 779 days before being strangled and dissolved in acid. Even his own family couldn't escape the horror. His wife, Vincenzina Marchese, committed suicide on May 12, 1995, reportedly due in part to her horror at her husband's involvement in the child kidnapping. And even in prison, Bagarella remained violent, throwing boiling oil on an 'Ndrangheta boss in 2005. Bagarella currently serves 13 life sentences plus 106 years under Italy's harshest prison regime. The man Buscetta said wasn't human will die in a cell. But at least Bagarella killed his victims relatively quickly, unlike the next boss who turned murder into an industrial assembly line. The Gemini Method. Roy DeMeo didn't just kill people. He turned murder into an industrial process with the efficiency of a factory assembly line. And the numbers prove it. And before you dismiss this as exaggeration, hear me out. DeMeo led a Gambino family crew that federal prosecutor William Mack Jr. called the most violent crew ever prosecuted in federal court, engaged in wholesale slaughter. The crew is believed responsible for between 75 and 200 murders. DeMeo himself personally killed approximately 37 to 40 people. But what made him disturbing wasn't the body count, it was the method. The crew operated from the Gemini Lounge, a neighborhood bar in Canarsie, Brooklyn. Behind the bar was an apartment they called Horror Hotel, and that's where they perfected what came to be known as the Gemini Method, a systematic dismemberment protocol so efficient it functioned like an assembly line. A victim was lured through a side door. DeMeo approached with a silenced pistol in one hand and a towel in the other. He shot the victim in the head. The towel was immediately wrapped around the wound like a turban to contain blood. Another crew member instantly stabbed the victim in the heart to stop blood from pumping. The body was dragged to the bathroom to drain, then placed on plastic sheeting and dismembered. Arms, legs, and head severed. Parts were bagged, boxed, and hauled to the Fountain Avenue landfill. The entire process took under an hour. But here's where it gets dark. Individual murders revealed a capacity for gratuitous cruelty beyond efficiency. Romanian immigrant Andrei Katz, a grand jury witness, was lured to a supermarket meat department on June 13, 1975, stabbed repeatedly, then decapitated. His head was crushed in a cardboard compacting machine. The most haunting killing was Dominic Ragucci on April 19. In 1979, an innocent college student working as a door-to-door salesman. DeMeo, in a fit of paranoia, mistook Ragucci's parked car for a threat, chased the terrified young man 7 miles through Long Island traffic, and shot him dead. When DeMeo learned the truth, his son later wrote that he broke down crying and refused to eat for days. DeMeo's end came on January 10, 1983, his son's 17th birthday. Boss Paul Castellano, fearing DeMeo would cooperate with federal investigators, ordered his execution. DeMeo appeared to anticipate his death, leaving his wallet, watch, and ring at home, and carrying a religious pamphlet suggesting he had gone to confession. At a body shop in Canarsie, his own mentor, Nino Gaggi, opened fire. DeMeo threw his hands up. 2 bullets burst into his face. He received 7 gunshot wounds to the head and was stuffed into the trunk of his Cadillac, where his frozen body sat undiscovered for 10 days. But if you think an assembly line murder operation is disturbing, wait until you hear about the Sicilian boss who waged war on civilization itself. The Beast. Salvatore Riina earned the nickname La Belva, the Beast, and he didn't just accept it, he lived up to it in ways that redefined what the Sicilian Mafia was capable of, and the scale alone is staggering. Here's the thing, Riina amassed 26 life sentences over a criminal career that reshaped Cosa Nostra into a terrorist organization. As boss of the Corleonesi clan, he engineered the Second Mafia War from 1981 to 1983, a campaign of extermination that produced an estimated 1,000 murders. That's roughly 1 per day in Palermo alone. Then he turned his violence against the Italian state itself, systematically assassinating judges, police chiefs, politicians, and journalists who opposed him. But Riina broke every traditional rule of Cosa Nostra. He ordered the murder of women and children. He targeted the families of informants with systematic cruelty. After Tommaso Buscetta cooperated with authorities, Riina had both of Buscetta's sons disappeared, then murdered his brother, son-in-law, brother-in-law, and 4 nephews. When Francesco Marino Manoia testified, Riina had his mother, aunt, and sister killed. On December 23, 1984, he ordered the bombing of Train 904, the Naples to Milan Express, killing 17 civilians and wounding 267, solely to divert investigative attention from an informant's revelations. But here's where it gets genuinely horrifying. His most devastating attacks targeted the judiciary. On May 23, 1992, 500 kilograms of explosives packed into a drainage culvert under the A29 motorway near Capaci detonated as Judge Giovanni Falcone's convoy passed. The blast was so massive it registered on volcanic monitoring equipment across the island. Falcone, his wife Francesca Morvillo, and 3 police escorts died. Pentito Salvatore Concemi described how Riina ordered champagne to toast Falcone's death. Just 57 days later, Judge Paolo Borsellino and 5 escorts were killed by a car bomb on Via D'Amelio, even after his January 1993 arrest. Ending 23 years as a fugitive living openly in Palermo, the violence he had set in motion continued. His loyalists bombed Florence's Uffizi Gallery, Milan's Pavilion of Contemporary Art, and Rome's Basilica of St. John Lateran, killing 10 and injuring over 70 while damaging irreplaceable cultural treasures. He was also sentenced to life for the Pizzolungo massacre, in which a bomb killed Barbara Rizzo and her 6-year-old twin sons. Riina never expressed a single word of repentance. He died in a prison hospital in Parma on November 17, 2017, one day after his 87th birthday, still regarded as the capo of Cosa Nostra. But if you think bombing judges and civilians is the worst a mafia boss can do, the final man on this list committed what Italian police called one of the most heinous crimes in the history of Cosa Nostra: the People Slayer. Giovanni Brusca committed what Italian police have called one of the most heinous crimes in the history of Cosa Nostra. And when you understand what that crime was, you'll realize why he sits at the top of this list. Let me explain. Brusca, known as U Veru, the pig, and U Scana Cristiani, the people slayer, was born into a deeply embedded mafia dynasty. His father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all members. He confessed to between 100 and 200 murders, stating he could not remember the exact number. He was the man who pressed the detonator for the Capaci bombing on May 23, 1992, watching through binoculars from a hilltop as 500 kilograms of explosives obliterated Judge Falcone's convoy. He helped execute the 1983 car bombing of Judge Rocco Chinnici. He was a key architect of the 1993 mainland bombing campaign that killed 5 people, including a 50-day-old infant. But here's where it becomes incomprehensible. The act that places Brusca at the summit of this list is the kidnapping and murder of Giuseppe Di Matteo. After the boy's father, Santino Di Matteo, became the first of Falcone's assassins to cooperate with authorities, Brusca ordered 11-year-old Giuseppe abducted on November 23, 1993. The kidnappers dressed as elite anti-mafia police and told the child they were taking him to see his father. What followed was 779 days of captivity, over 2 years in which the boy was moved between damp cells, kept bound, hooded, and deprived of basic hygiene or medical care. Photographs of his deteriorating condition were sent to his father to pressure him into retracting testimony. By the end, the boy's body had wasted so completely that one of his captors later testified the child didn't have the reaction of a child and seemed made of butter. On January 11, 1996, on Brusca's direct orders, Giuseppe, now approximately 14 years old, was strangled to death. His body was then dissolved in a barrel of acid, obliterating all physical trace of his existence. The executioners were Brusca's own brother Enzo, along with Vincenzo Chiodo and Salvatore Monticciolo. The crime horrified even hardened Mafia members and devastated Italy. When Giuseppe's father confronted Brusca in court in 1997, he burst into tears and told the judge, "I guarantee my collaboration, but to this animal I guarantee nothing. If you leave me alone with him for 2 minutes, I'll cut off his head." Guards had to physically restrain him. Brusca was arrested on May 20, 1996, while dining with his family in the Sicilian countryside. Dozens of officers at Palermo police station cheered and embraced when he was brought in. One slipped past guards and punched him in the face. His cooperation with authorities, eventually substantive after months of lies, earned sentence reductions. On May 31, 2021, Brusca walked free from Rome's Rebibbia prison after serving 25 years, sparking national outrage. League Party leader Matteo Salvini spoke for many. "A person who dissolved a child in acid is, in my opinion, a wild beast and cannot get out of prison." Brusca now lives under police protection, hidden from public view. The man who dissolved a child and walked free. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.